Welcome back, friends. In this video, we're going to be talking about suicide in business. There's a growing problem in the business world today that's both sad and shocking, and I'm talking about the growing rate of suicide. So recently we've seen the tragic deaths of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, and these are both two tragic deaths that took the world by surprise. The CDC released statistics that show suicide rates are up 30% in half of US states since 1999. We also know that business owners report higher levels of stress and mental health conditions compared to other workers, and this is from a 2018 study in the Small Business Economics Journal. So suicide and mental health issues are a growing problem. But unfortunately, this is something that they don't teach you about in business school. In fact, if you've gone through a business school, I am betting that no one has talked to you about suicide even once. So we're going to talk about it in this video. And the first question is, why is nobody else talking about it? And I think there's two main reasons for this. The first reason is that it's a really difficult problem to understand. So these people that we're talking about, they're rich, they're famous, they're successful, they have businesses of their own, they have pretty much everything that life has to offer out in front of them. And still, they decide to end their life. So that's a really hard problem to wrap your mind around, and there really is no easy answers. The second reason, and I want to focus on this one more, is that when you're working in the business world, there's an expectation that you are invincible. So you're going to be in a job that's high stress, high pressure, and you're expected to deal with it without showing any weakness. So I have to admit that as a business person myself, I feel that pressure to be invincible, and I'm sure you do as well. When the reality is, you are human, just like everybody else, and you have frailties, just like everybody else. Now, I'm not a psychologist, I'm an accountant, so I can't offer you any real solutions here, and I can't explain why there's a growth in the rate of suicide. My whole goal here is to just talk about this. I know that there's business people out there today who are struggling, and they have no one to talk to. And I know that sometimes it helps just to hear somebody else's story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a story from my own experience. And the only reason I can talk about this on camera is because this happened so long ago, and depression is not something I normally struggle with. But I don't care who you are. All of us sometimes go through difficult situations. And for me, this was my darkest moment. This story happened when I was 21 years old. I was in college and I was attending USC, which is the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Now, this is going to be a bad story, so please do not take this as negative criticism about USC. During my time at USC, I had an incredible experience. I think it's one of the best universities in the world. This was just one negative experience I had during my time there, and it was a pretty bad one. Basically what happened was I had a confrontation with USC's private security force, where I was falsely accused of tampering with the fire alarm system in university housing. The investigation was done very poorly, and my life spiraled out of control. So this all started one night where I was sitting in my apartment and I hear a knock at the door. And so I go to the door to find the campus police. And they inform me that someone had cut the wires in the fire alarm system that was in the hallway outside my apartment. And they asked if I had done it. And I was so confused. So what you have to understand here is that USC is a private institution. So it's a private business with a private security force, privately owned university housing. And so there's no government involvement here. You don't have the same level of rights. If you break the rules, they can basically just kick you out. So I let the officers know that I didn't do it, I didn't know anything, but they insisted on searching my apartment. So they come in, they look around, of course they don't find anything, but they let me know that the investigators will be in touch with me. So the next day, I get a call from the investigator who tells me to come down to the station for an interrogation. And I'm so confused at this point. How could they think I had anything to do with this? I was a good student, I got good grades, I didn't do drugs. It was almost like I was in one of those old suspense films where there was a case of mistaken identity for a crime I didn't commit. They ended up calling me in for 3 different interrogation sessions, and they were pretty intense. The campus police was convinced that I was involved somehow. And so they gave me a choice. Either I sign a confession of guilt, or they threatened to kick me out of school. And because this was a private institution, there was no judge, no jury, no accountability for this investigator, and he was just going to decide who was guilty and who was innocent. Now here's where it starts to get really crazy, because as these interrogation sessions were going on, I started finding out more and more pieces of information. So it turns out that the police also searched my neighbor's apartment. And it turns out that my neighbors were a couple of architecture students that knew how the fire alarm system worked. And it turns out that the police, in searching their apartment, found a set of wire cutters sitting on their kitchen table. It also turns out that they found drugs in their apartment. And it also turns out that one of these students eventually confessed to cutting the wires. And the reason they did it was because they wanted to smoke drugs in their apartment and not have the fire alarm system go off. So I'm sitting in the interrogation room and I'm thinking, this is a pretty obvious case. But that's not how the campus police saw it. They still thought that I was involved and they were still threatening to expel me. Looking back on this 15 years later, the only thing that makes sense to me is I am betting that my neighbors tried to push the blame off on me. I mean, I think they said something like, oh, well, my neighbor must have done it. That's the only thing that makes sense because there was no evidence I was involved in this at all. And I can understand USC's perspective on this as well, because tampering with fire alarms is a serious crime, and they wanted to make an example of me. But you also have to understand my position. I was a poor kid, and USC was a very expensive school. So I couldn't really afford to go to USC. And what I ended up doing was I took out an enormous amount of debt to be able to pay my college bills. So here I am. I'm 3 years into college. So if I had gotten kicked out, I would have left university with a huge mountain of debt and nothing to show for it. It would have ruined my life. And there was this one investigator who was going to decide who was guilty and who was innocent, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was also a high performer. So I was a really driven kid. And many business people are high performers. The problem with being a high performer is that when your life starts to crumble around you, it is devastating. It's very difficult to handle. What made the situation even worse is that I felt so helpless. It felt like there was nothing I could do to influence the situation. And to be honest, I've been in worse situations than this in my life. But the difference between this situation and other bad situations is that usually when you find yourself in a bad situation, there's usually something you can do to start working your way out of it. That's not how I felt here. I felt completely helpless, and it was that feeling of helplessness that really destroyed my soul. During this time, I really struggled. And I have to be honest here, I thought about killing myself. My life was about to be over for something I had nothing to do with. I made plans, and I figured out how I was going to do it. Looking back at that time, it was almost like the situation was so oppressive that I wasn't thinking straight. It was like the world around me wasn't making sense, and so it was as if the connections in my brain weren't firing. Ultimately, I did not kill myself. Making videos saved my life. So I was living in Los Angeles, and I was already working on a bunch of different film projects. And so I had a lot to keep me busy. But it was a lot more than just staying busy. I had these creative outlets that I could express my frustration. And so that helped me a lot. To the credit of USC, USC eventually dropped all charges against me. And I'm so happy that I made it through this situation, because since that time, I've had so many incredible experiences in my life that I would have missed out on. So let's talk about the main point of this story, which is this. I have not told this story to anyone ever until today in this video. So this is a traumatic event that happened in my life over 15 years ago, and I've never mentioned it to anyone. Because as a young man trying to make it in the business world, this is the type of thing that it's considered not okay to talk about. And as a business community, we need to talk about this stuff. And business schools, I am calling you out on this. How come you never talk to your students about how to deal with mental issues? I'm here to say, if you're struggling with something or you're having a hard time, it's okay. All of us go through hard times, and I hope you realize that there's services out there that can help you. There's even free counseling that's available out there. You just have to be open to the opportunities that are near you. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that you don't have to be invincible, because you're human too. So if you made it this far in this video, I just want to say thank you for watching. And if you're out there and you're struggling with something, I want to send you hope and a big hug. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It'll help more people to see this video. And as always, the best way to supercharge a business is through accounting and corporate finance, and I release a new video every week, so come back and check out next week's video.